The Caregiving Flowchart. Nancy Abernathy was teaching a seminar for first-year medical students on interpersonal and decision-making skills when the worst happened. Her husband, just 50, died of a heart attack while cross-country skiing in the woods behind their Vermont home. He died during her winter break. Suddenly bereft, raising her two teenagers on her own, Abernathy struggled through the next semester, sharing with her students her own feelings of bereavement and loss, a reality they would face routinely in the families of their patients who died. At one point, Abernathy confided that she was dreading the next year, particularly the class that included showing photos of everyone's family. What pictures of her own family, she wondered, would she bring? And how much of her grief would she share? How could she avoid weeping as she told of her husband's death? Even so, she signed up to teach the course the next year and bade her current students goodbye. The next fall, on the day of that dreaded class, Abernathy arrived early, only to find that the room was already partly full. To her surprise, the seats were occupied by her students from the year before. All second-year medical students now, they had come simply to lend their presence and offer their support. This is compassion, Abernathy testifies, a simple human connection between the one who suffers and one who would heal. Just as they share a mission of caregiving, those who give the care need to look after one another. In any human service organization, staff-to-staff concern affects the quality of caring they can give. Staff caregiving is an adult version of offering a secure base. It can be witnessed in the mundane, mood-lifting interactions that go on in any workplace in the course of a day, from simply being available and lending a sympathetic ear to stopping to listen to a complaint. Or it can take the form of giving respect, or a word of admiration or a compliment, or by appreciating someone's work. When people in the helping professions get little or no sense of having a secure base in those they work with or for, they become more susceptible to compassion fatigue. The hug, the listening ear, the sympathetic look all matter, but they are too easily lost amid the din of frenetic activity typical in any human services setting. Careful observation can produce a map of the give and take of such caregiving. Indeed, a virtual flowchart for caregiving resulted from 3 years of observations by William Kahn, who cast an anthropological eye over the small daily exchanges among the staff of a social service agency. The agency's mandate was to provide homeless children with an adult volunteer who would be companion, mentor, and role model. Like many nonprofits, the agency struggled with too few funds and too little staff. Caring interactions are nothing special, Kahn discovered. Rather, they are embedded in the daily life of any workplace. For instance, when a new social worker presented a difficult case at a weekly meeting, a more seasoned social worker listened attentively to his frustrations, asked probing questions, held back her most negative judgments, and said how impressed she was with the novice's sensitivity. That was a natural display of multiple modes of caregiving. At another meeting, however, where the social worker's supervisor was supposed to discuss their most problematic cases, things went very differently. The supervisor blithely ignored the purpose of the meeting, instead launching into a monologue on administrative issues that were of more concern to her. All the while she stared down at her notes, avoiding eye contact, left little opportunity for questions, let alone comments, and made not a single inquiry about what the social workers thought. She expressed no empathy for the social workers' overwhelming caseloads, and when a question was asked about scheduling, she could not come up with the crucial information. Caregiving score? 0. As for the flow of caregiving at this agency, let's start at the top. The executive director was fortunate in having a board of directors who enthusiastically supported him. His board president was a model secure base, listening sympathetically to the director's predicaments and frustrations, and offering help and reassurances that the board would not abandon him, while giving him the autonomy to do things his way. But the executive director provided none of that caring to the overburdened social workers who did the main work of the agency. He never asked how they felt, encouraged them, or showed a whit of respect for their valiant efforts. His relationship with them was emotionally barren. He spoke to them only in the most abstract terms, oblivious to the frustration and outrage they expressed when given the rare chance. The result was only disconnection. Still, the executive director did offer some caregiving down the ladder. to his fundraiser, who reciprocated. The two formed a mutual support society, listening to each other's troubles, offering counsel and consolation, but neither of them gave a bit to anyone else at the agency. Paradoxically, the social work supervisor, who reported to the executive director, gave far more support to her boss than he did to her. This kind of reverse caregiving is surprisingly common, with subordinates offering unreciprocated care to their superiors. The upward flow resembles the dynamic in dysfunctional families, where a parent abdicates responsibility and instead reverses roles, seeking care from the children. The supervisor also reversed the flow with the social workers in her charge, giving them virtually no care, but instead seeking it from them. For instance, in a meeting where one social worker asked the supervisor if she had as yet found out from another agency how they were to file forms reporting child abuse, the supervisor responded that she had tried but had had no luck. At that, another social worker offered to take over the task. The social workers took over many of their supervisor's other duties, like scheduling, and shielded her from the emotional force of their own distress. The greatest volume of caregiving passed among the social workers themselves. Abandoned emotionally by their supervisor, faced with daunting pressures and fending off burnout, they tried to build an emotional cocoon around themselves. In meetings without their supervisor, they would ask how each other was doing, listen and empathize, offer emotional and concrete support, and generally help each other out. Many of the social workers told Kahn that when they felt cared about themselves, they were more willing and able to be active caregivers in their work. As one said, "When I'm feeling like I'm worthwhile around here, I throw myself into the supervision of the children in their charge." Even so, the social workers had a swelling emotional debit. They gave far more than they received. Their energy was being drained as they worked with their clients, despite their efforts to replenish one another. Month by month, they would withdraw emotionally from their work, burn out, and eventually leave. Over 2.5 years, 14 people quit the 6 social work positions. Lacking emotional refills, caregivers run on empty. To the degree that healthcare workers feel that others give them the emotional support they need, they will be better able to offer the same to their patients. But a burned-out social worker, doctor, or nurse has no emotional resources to draw on. Healing healers. There's another pragmatic argument for enhancing the place of compassion in medicine. In terms of cost effectiveness, that inarguable standard for so many organizational decisions, it helps retain valuable staff. The data here come from a study of the emotional work done by healthcare workers, mostly nurses. Those nurses whose work made them more upset lost track of their sense of mission and had poor physical health, and most strongly wanted to leave their job. The researchers concluded that these problems stemmed from the nurses catching distress from the despair, anger, or anxiety of those they dealt with. This negativity threatened to spill over into the nurses' interactions with others, whether patients or coworkers. But if a nurse had nourishing relationships with patients and frequently felt she improved their moods, she herself benefited emotionally. Things like simply speaking warmly and showing affection made nurses feel less psychological stress from their work, as did get-togethers for patients or staff. These more emotionally connected nurses had better physical health, as well as a sense of a meaningful mission, and they were far less likely to want to leave their jobs. The more a nurse confronts or stirs up distress in patients, the more distress she catches. The more a nurse makes patients and their families feel good, the better she feels. In the course of a day's work, any nurse will surely do both, but the data suggest that the more times she primes good feelings, the better she herself will feel. And that ratio of positive to negative emotional interactions, to a great degree, is in the nurse's own hands. One emotional task that often leads to catching distress is continually listening to someone's worries. This problem has been called compassion fatigue, where a helper herself becomes overwhelmed by the anguish of those she tries to help. One solution for the helper is not to stop listening, but rather to find emotional support. In a compassionate medical setting, people like nurses who operate at the front line of pain and despair need help to metabolize that inevitable suffering, rendering them more emotionally resilient. Institutions must make sure nurses and other staff have enough support themselves to be empathic without burning out. Just as people whose work makes them vulnerable to repetitive stress injuries take stretched timeouts, those who do stressful emotional work can benefit from timeouts to calm down before re-entering the fray. But such restorative breaks will never become routine unless the emotional work done by those in the medical professions become valued by administrators as an important, even crucial part of their task, one that needs to be done along with, rather than in spite of, other duties. Typically, the emotional component of healthcare jobs does not count as real work, but if the need for emotional care were routinely regarded as an essential part of the job, then health workers could do their jobs better. The immediate problem comes down to getting more of these qualities into medicine as practiced. Such emotional labor can be found nowhere in the job descriptions of healthcare workers. Worse, medicine can be prone to the most common error in choosing leaders, what one wry observer noted as the tendency to promote people to their level of incompetence. Someone is likely to become a department head or executive on the basis of their technical excellence as an individual performer, such as a brilliant surgeon, without regard for essential capacities like empathy. When people are promoted to management based on medical expertise, not people skills, notes Joan Strauss, senior project manager for service improvement at Massachusetts General, a famous Harvard Medical School hospital, they sometimes need coaching. For instance, they may not know how to hold people accountable in a respectful and open way, without being a patsy on the one hand or Attila the Hun on the other. Studies comparing superb leaders with mediocre ones have found that the competencies that distinguish the best from the worst in human services have little or nothing to do with medical knowledge or technical skill, and everything to do with social and emotional intelligence. Of course, medical knowledge matters for healthcare leaders, but it's a given, a threshold competence that every health professional must have. What distinguishes leaders in medicine goes far beyond that knowledge, into interpersonal skills like empathy, conflict resolution, and people development. Compassionate medicine needs caring leaders, ones who themselves can give medical staff the sense of a safe emotional base to work from. Healing relationships. Kenneth Schwartz, a successful Boston lawyer, was 40 when he was diagnosed with lung cancer. The day before he was scheduled to have surgery, he came to his hospital's pre-surgery area and sat in a mobbed waiting area while harried nurses scurried about. Finally, his name was called, and he went to an office where a nurse conducted a pre-surgery interview. At first, she seemed quite brusque. Schwartz felt like just another faceless patient. But when he told her he had lung cancer, her face softened. She took his hand and asked how he was doing. Suddenly, they left their nurse-patient roles, as Schwartz told her about his 2-year-old son, Ben. She said her nephew was named Ben, too. By the end of their conversation, she was wiping tears from her eyes. Though she ordinarily did not go to the surgical floor in her job, she said she would come to visit him. The next day, as he sat in a wheelchair waiting to be wheeled into the surgical suite, there she was. She took his hand and with teary eyes wished him luck. That was but one of a series of compassionate encounters with medical staff, acts of kindness that, as Schwartz put it at the time, made the unbearable bearable. Shortly before his death, just months later, Schwartz created a legacy that he hoped would make such moments of benevolence more likely to reach many more patients. He founded the Kenneth B. Schwartz Center at the Massachusetts General Hospital to support and advance compassionate health care that offers hope to patients and support to caregivers, and that aids the process of healing. The Schwartz Center bestows an annual Compassionate Caregiver Award to honor medical staff who have shown extraordinary kindness in caring for patients and so can serve as role models. Another promising innovation from the center is a variation of the standard medical grand rounds, which typically update medical staff on new developments in their fields. Instead, the Schwartz Center rounds give hospital staff a chance to come together to share their concerns and fears. The premise is that from gaining insight into their own responses and feelings, caregivers will be better able to make a personal connection with their patients. When we had our first Schwartz Center round, reports Dr. Beth Lown of Mount Auburn Hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts, We expected no more than 60 or 70 people, which is a good turnout. But to our surprise, around 160 medical staff showed up. These rounds really speak to a need for us to talk honestly with one another about what it's like to do our work. As an officer of the American Academy on Physician and Patient, Dr. Lowen has a unique perspective. The motive to connect with people that draws so many into medicine gets slowly supplanted by the hospital culture, a biomedical orientation, technology-driven, and geared to getting patients in and out as quickly as possible. The question is not whether empathy can be taught, but what are we doing that drives it out of medical students? That medical certification exams now include an evaluation of interpersonal adeptness testifies to the new importance being placed on doctors cultivating skills like relationship and rapport building. One focus is the medical interview, which an average physician conducts up to 200,000 times over the course of a career. This conversation is the best chance for a physician and patient to develop a good working alliance. The ever-analytical medical mind has broken the patient interview into 7 discrete parts, from opening the discussion, through gathering and sharing information, to making plans for treatment. The interview guidelines emphasize not the medical dimensions, that's taken for granted, but rather the human one. Physicians are urged, for instance, to let a patient complete his first statement rather than commandeering the conversation from the first few seconds, and to elicit all of a patient's concerns and questions. They need to make a personal connection and understand how the patient perceives the illness and treatment. In other words, they need to deploy empathy and build rapport. Such skills, Dr. Lowen says, can be taught and learned, but they must be practiced and cultivated like any other clinical skill. And doing so, she argues, not only makes physicians more efficient, but means patients will adhere to treatment better and be more satisfied with their care. Kenneth Schwartz, writing just a few months before he died, put it more directly. Quiet acts of humanity have felt more healing than the high-dose radiation and chemotherapy that hold the hope of cure. While I do not believe that hope and comfort alone can overcome cancer, it certainly made a huge difference to me. Part 6. Social Consequence. Chapter 19. The Sweet Spot for Achievement. You are driving to work, planning an important meeting with a colleague, and intermittently reminding yourself that you must remember to turn left at the traffic light, not right as usual, so you can drop your suit at the cleaners. Suddenly, an ambulance screams up behind you, and you speed up to get out of the way. You feel your heart quicken. You try to resume planning the morning's meeting, but your thoughts are disorganized now, and you lose concentration, distracted. When you get to work, you berate yourself because you forgot to go to the cleaners. This scenario comes not from some business primer, but from the academic journal Science, as the beginning of an article called The Biology of Being Frazzled. The article summarizes the effects on thinking and performance caused by being mildly upset, frazzled from the hassles of daily life. Frazzle is a neural state in which emotional upsurges hamper the workings of the executive center. While we are frazzled, we cannot concentrate or think clearly. That neural truth has direct implications for achieving the optimal emotional atmosphere, both in the classroom and the office. From the vantage point of the brain, doing well in school and at work involves one and the same state, the brain's sweet spot for performance. The biology of anxiety casts us out of that zone for excellence. Banish fear was a slogan of the late quality control guru Richard Deming. He saw that fear froze a workplace. Workers were reluctant to speak up, to share new ideas, or to coordinate well, let alone to improve the quality of their output. The same slogan applies to the classroom. Fear frazzles the mind, disrupting learning. The basic neurobiology of frazzle reflects the body's default plan for emergency. When we are under stress, the HPA axis roars into action, preparing the body for crisis. Among other biological maneuvers, the amygdala commandeers the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center. This shift in control to the low road favors automatic habits, as the amygdala draws on knee-jerk responses to save us. The thinking brain gets sidelined for the duration. The high road moves too slowly. As our brain hands decision-making over to the low road, we lose our ability to think at our best. The more intense the pressure, the more our performance and thinking will suffer. The ascendant amygdala handicaps our abilities for learning, for holding information in working memory, for reacting flexibly and creatively, for focusing attention at will, and for planning and organizing effectively. We plunge into what neuroscientists call cognitive dysfunction. The worst period I ever went through at work, a friend confides, was when the company was restructuring and people were being disappeared daily, followed by lying memos that they were leaving for personal reasons. No one could focus while that fear was in the air. No real work got done. Small wonder. The greater the anxiety we feel, the more impaired is the brain's cognitive efficiency. In this zone of mental misery, distracting thoughts hijack our attention and squeeze our cognitive resources. Because high anxiety shrinks the space available to our attention, it undermines our very capacity to take in new information, let alone generate fresh ideas. Near panic is the enemy of learning and creativity. The neural highway for dysphoria runs from the amygdala to the right side of the prefrontal cortex. As this circuitry activates, our thoughts fixate on what has triggered the distress, and as we become preoccupied by, say, worry or resentment, our mental agility sputters. Likewise, when we are sad, activity levels in the prefrontal cortex drop, and we generate fewer thoughts. Extremes of anxiety and anger on the one hand, and sadness on the other, push brain activity beyond its zones for effectiveness. Boredom fogs the brain with its own brand of inefficiency. As minds wander, they lose focus. Motivation vanishes. In any meeting that has gone on too long, as most do, the vacant eyes of those trapped at the table will betray this inner absence, and we all remember days of ennui as students, absently staring out the window. An optimal state. A high school class is playing a game with crossword puzzles, working in pairs. Both partners have the same puzzle, but one's copy has words filled in where the other's has blanks. The challenge? Help your partner guess the missing words by giving her clues. And since this is a Spanish class, those clues must be in Spanish, as are the words to be guessed. The students get so swept up in the game that they are completely oblivious to the bell ringing at the end of class. No one gets up to leave. They all want to keep working on the puzzles. Not incidentally, the next day when they write essays in Spanish using the words they learned in the puzzles, the students show excellent comprehension of their new vocabulary. These students were having fun learning, yet they mastered their lessons well. Indeed, such moments of total absorption and pleasure may mark learning at its best. Contrast that Spanish lesson with an English class. The topic that day was how to use commas. One student, bored and distracted, slipped her hand into her bag and discreetly pulled out a catalog for a clothing store. It was as though she had left one store in a mall for another. Sam Intrater, an educator, spent a year observing high school classrooms like these. Whenever he witnessed an absorbing moment like the one with the crossword puzzle in the Spanish class, he would canvass the students on what they had been thinking and feeling. If most students reported a state of total involvement in what was being taught, he would rate the moment inspired. The inspired moments of learning shared the same active ingredients, a potent combination of full attention, enthusiastic interest, and positive emotional intensity. The joy in learning comes during these moments. Such joyous moments, says University of Southern California neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, signify optimal physiological coordination and smooth runnings of the operations of life. Damasio, one of the world's leading neuroscientists, has long been a pioneer in linking findings in brain science to human experience. Damasio argues that more than merely letting us survive the daily grind, joyous states allow us to flourish, to live well, and to feel well-being. Such upbeat states, he notes, allow a greater ease in the capacity to act, a greater harmony in our functioning that enhances our power and freedom in whatever we do. The field of cognitive science, Damasio notes, in studying the neural networks that run mental operations, finds similar conditions and dubs them maximal harmonious states. When the mind runs with such internal harmony, ease, efficiency, rapidity, and power are at a maximum. We experience such moments with a quiet thrill. Imaging studies show that while people are in such exhilarating upbeat states, the area of the brain that displays most activity is in the prefrontal cortex, the hub of the high road. Heightened prefrontal activity enhances mental abilities like creative thinking, cognitive flexibility, and the processing of information. Even physicians, those paragons of rationality, think more clearly when they are in good moods. Radiologists who read X-rays to help other physicians make their diagnoses work with greater speed and accuracy after getting a small mood-boosting gift, and their diagnostic notes include more helpful suggestions for further treatment, as well as more offers to do further consultation. An upside-down U. Plotting the relationship between mental adeptness and performance generally, and the spectrum of moods creates what looks like an upside-down U with its legs spread out a bit. Joy, cognitive efficiency, and outstanding performance occur at the peak of the inverted U. Along the downside of one leg lies boredom, along the other, anxiety. The more apathy or angst we feel, the worse we do, whether on a term paper or an office memo. We are lifted out of the days of boredom as a challenge piques our interest, our motivation increases, and attention focuses. The height of cognitive performance occurs where motivation and focus peak, at the intersection of a task's difficulty and our ability to match its demand. At a tipping point just past this peak of cognitive efficiency, challenges begin to exceed ability, and so the downside of the inverted U begins. We taste panic as we realize, say, we've procrastinated disastrously long on that paper or memo. From there, our increasing anxiety erodes our cognitive efficiency. As tasks multiply in difficulty and challenge melts into overwhelm, the low road becomes increasingly active. The high road frazzles as the challenges engulf our abilities and the brain hands the reins to the low road. This neural shift of control from the high to the low road accounts for the shape of the upside-down U. The inverted U reflects the impact of two different neural systems on learning and performance. Both build as enhanced attention and motivation increase the activity of the glucocorticoid system. Healthy levels of cortisol energize us for engagement. Positive moods elicit the mild to moderate range of cortisol associated with better learning. But if stress continues to climb after that optimal point where people learn and perform at their best, a second neural system kicks in to secrete norepinephrine at the high levels found when we feel outright fear. From this point, the start of that downward slope toward panic, the more stress escalates, the worse our mental efficiency and performance become. During high anxiety, the brain secretes high levels of cortisol plus norepinephrine that interfere with the smooth operation of neural mechanisms for learning and memory. When these stress hormones reach a critical level, they enhance amygdala function but debilitate the prefrontal areas, which lose their ability to contain amygdala-driven impulses. As any student knows who has suddenly found himself studying harder as a test approaches, a modicum of pressure enhances motivation and focuses attention. Up to a point, selective attention increases as levels of pressure ratchet upward, like looming deadlines, a teacher watching, or a challenging assignment. Paying fuller attention means that working memory operates with more cognitive efficiency, culminating in maximum mental ease. But at a tipping point just past the optimal state, where challenges begin to overmatch ability, increasing anxiety starts to erode cognitive efficiency. For example, in this zone of performance disaster, students with math anxiety have less attention available when they tackle a math problem. Their anxious worrying occupies the attentional space they need, impairing their ability to solve problems or grasp new concepts. All of this directly affects how well we do in the classroom or on the job. While we are distressed, we don't think clearly, and we tend to lose interest in pursuing even goals that are important to us. Psychologists who have studied the effects of mood on learning conclude that when students are neither attentive nor happy in class, they absorb only a fraction of the information being presented. The drawbacks apply as well to teachers and leaders. Foul feelings weaken empathy and concern. For example, managers in bad moods give more negative performance appraisals, focusing only on the downside, and are more disapproving in their opinions. Surely the same holds for teachers. The high road does best at moderate to challenging levels of stress, while the low road takes over under extreme pressure. A neural key to learning. It's a high school class in chemistry, and the tension in the room is palpable. Students are on edge because they know that at any moment their teacher may call on them at random, have them go to the board in front of the class, and then ask them to calculate the answer to a difficult chemical interaction on the spot. All but the brightest budding chemists fail at these questions. For the bright kids, it's a moment of pride. For the rest, shame. The type of stress that most activates the stress hormones and so shoots up cortisol levels lurks in the classroom in the form of social threats like fears of a teacher's judgment or of seeming stupid in the eyes of other students. Such social fears powerfully impair the brain's mechanisms for learning. People differ in their set points for where the U tips. Those students who can take the most stress without disabling their high road abilities will be unflappable at the blackboard, whether they get the question right or wrong. As adults, they would likely thrive as Wall Street traders who can make or lose a fortune in a wink of the market. But those more susceptible to HPA arousal will freeze mentally even at low levels of distress, and if they are unprepared for the chemistry pop quiz or are slow learners, being called to the blackboard offers them only misery. The hippocampus, near the amygdala in the midbrain, is our central organ for learning. This structure enables us to convert the contents of working memory, new information held briefly in the prefrontal cortex, into long-term form for storage. This neural act is the heart of learning. Once our mind connects this information with what we already know, we will be able to bring the new understanding to mind weeks or years later. Whatever a student hears in class or reads in a book travels these pathways as he masters yet another iota of understanding. Indeed, everything that happens to us in life, all the details that we will remember, depend on the hippocampus to stay with us. The continual retention of memories demands a frenzy of neuronal activity. In fact, the vast majority of neurogenesis, the brain's production of new neurons and laying down of connections to others, takes place in the hippocampus. The hippocampus is especially vulnerable to ongoing emotional distress because of the damaging effects of cortisol. Under prolonged stress, cortisol attacks the neurons of the hippocampus, slowing the rate at which neurons are added or even reducing the total number, with a disastrous impact on learning. The actual killing off of hippocampal neurons occurs during sustained cortisol floods, induced, for example, by severe depression or intense trauma. However, with recovery, the hippocampus regains neurons and enlarges again. Even when the stress is less extreme, extended periods of high cortisol seem to hamper these same neurons. Cortisol stimulates the amygdala while it impairs the hippocampus, forcing our attention onto the emotions we feel while restricting our ability to take in new information. Instead, we imprint what is upsetting us. After a day when a student gets panicked by a pop quiz, he'll remember the details of that panic far more than any of the material in the quiz. In a simulation of the impact of cortisol on learning, college students volunteered to get injections that raised their cortisol levels, then to memorize a series of words and images. The result reflected the inverted U. In mild to moderate ranges, the cortisol helped the students remember what they had studied when tested on it 2 days later. But at extreme levels, the cortisol impaired their recall, apparently because it inhibited the crucial role of the hippocampus. This has profound implications for the kind of classroom atmosphere that fosters learning. The social environment, remember, affects the rate and fate of newly created brain cells. New cells take a month to mature and 4 more to fully link to other neurons. During this window, the environment determines in part the final shape and function of the cell. The new cells that facilitate memory during the course of a semester will encode in their links what has been learned during that time, and the more conducive the atmosphere for learning, the better that encoding will be. Distress kills learning. One classic finding dates back almost half a century to 1960, when Richard Alpert, then at Stanford, showed experimentally what every student already knew. High anxiety cripples test-taking ability. A more recent study of college students taking math exams found that when they were told the test was a practice, they scored 10% better than when they thought they were part of a team that depended on their score to win a cash prize. Under social stress, their working memory was hampered. Intriguingly, the deficit in this most basic cognitive ability was greatest for the smartest students. A group of 16-year-olds scored in the top 5% on a national test of potential in math. Some were doing extremely well in their math class, but others did poorly despite their aptitude for the subject. The crucial difference was that the high-achieving students experienced focused pleasure about 40% of the time they were immersed in their studies, more often than they felt anxious, about 30%. By contrast, while studying math, the low achievers experienced such optimal states only 16% of the time, and great anxiety 55%. Given how emotions affect performance, the emotional task of teachers or leaders is one and the same. Help people get and stay as close as possible to the top of the inverted U. Power and emotional flow. Whenever a meeting threatened to lapse into malaise, the president of a company would suddenly launch into a critique of someone at the table who could take it, usually the marketing director, who was his best friend. Then he would swiftly move on, having riveted the attention of everyone in the room. That tactic invariably revived the group's failing focus with keen interest. He was herding those in attendance up the inverted U from boredom to engagement. Displays of a leader's displeasure make use of emotional contagion. If artfully calibrated, even a burst of pique can stir followers enough to capture their attention and motivate them. Many effective leaders sense that well-titrated doses of irritation can energize, though too much can paralyze. The measure of how well calibrated a message of displeasure might be is whether it moves people toward their performance peak or plummets them past the tipping point into the zone where distress corrodes performance. Not all emotional partners are equal. A power dynamic operates in emotional contagion, determining which person's brain will more forcefully draw the other into its emotional orbit. Emotions flow with special strength from the more socially dominant person to the less. One reason is that people in any group naturally pay more attention to and place more significance on what the most powerful person in that group says and does. That amplifies the force of whatever emotional message the leader may be sending, making her emotions particularly contagious. As I heard the head of a small organization say rather ruefully, "When my mind is full of anger, other people catch it like the flu." A leader's emotional tone can have surprising power. When a manager delivered a piece of bad news, disappointment that an employee had failed to reach performance goals, with a warm demeanor, people nevertheless rated the interaction positively. When good news, pleasure that the goals had been met, was delivered with a sullen expression, the interaction paradoxically left people feeling bad. This emotional potency was tested when 56 heads of simulated work teams were themselves moved into a good or bad mood, and their subsequent emotional impact on the groups they led was assessed. Team members with upbeat leaders reported that they were feeling in better moods. Perhaps more to the point, they coordinated their work better, getting more done with less effort. On the other hand, the teams with grumpy bosses were thrown out of sync, making them inefficient. Worse, their panicked efforts to please the leader led to bad decisions and poorly chosen strategies. While a boss's artfully couched displeasure can be an effective goad, fuming is self-defeating as a leadership tactic. When leaders habitually use displays of bad moods to motivate, more work may seem to get done, but it will not necessarily be better work. And relentlessly foul moods corrode the emotional climate, sabotaging the brain's ability to work at its best. In this sense, leadership boils down to a series of social exchanges in which the leader can drive the other person's emotions into a better or worse state. In high-quality exchanges, the subordinate feels the leader's attention and empathy, support, and positivity. In low-quality interactions, he feels isolated and threatened. The passing of moods from leader to follower typifies any relationship where one person has power over another, such as teacher-student, doctor-patient, and parent-child. Despite the power differential in these relationships, they all have a benign potential to promote the growth, education, or healing of the less powerful person. That potential, however, goes unrealized all too often. Take the case of a healthcare worker who delivered a stillborn baby. While she was recovering in the hospital, her boss stopped by her room. She assumed he was there to offer sympathy for her devastating loss. Instead, he demanded to know how soon she could get back to work. The woman was so enraged by his coldness that she applied to transfer out of his unit. Such callousness from a boss not only heightens the risk of losing good people, it torpedoes cognitive efficiency. A socially intelligent leader helps people contain and recover from their emotional distress. If only from a business perspective, a leader would do well to react with empathy rather than indifference, and to act on it. Bosses, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Any collection of working people can readily recall two kinds of bosses they've known: one they loved to work for, and one they couldn't wait to escape. I've asked for such a list from dozens of groups ranging from meetings of CEOs to conventions of school teachers in cities as different as Sao Paulo, Brussels, and St. Louis. The lists that disparate groups generate, no matter where they are remarkably similar to this one. Good boss, bad boss. Great listener, blank wall. Encourager, doubter. Communicator, secretive. Courageous, intimidating. Sense of humor, bad temper. Shows empathy, self-centered. Decisive, indecisive. Takes responsibility, blames. Humble, arrogant. Shares authority, mistrusts. The best bosses are people who are trustworthy, empathic, and connected, who make us feel calm, appreciated, and inspired. The worst, distant, difficult, and arrogant, make us feel uneasy at best and resentful at worst. Those contrasting sets of attributes map well on the kind of parent who fosters security on the one hand and anxiety on the other. In fact, the emotional dynamic at work in managing employees shares much with parenting. Our parents form our basic template for a secure base in childhood, but others continue to add to it as we go through life. In school, our teachers fill that position. At work, our boss. Secure bases are sources of protection, energy, and comfort, allowing us to free our own energy, George Kohlreiser told me. Kohlreiser, a psychologist and professor of leadership at the International Institute for Management Development in Switzerland, observes that having a secure base at work is crucial for high performance. Feeling secure, Kohlreiser argues, lets a person focus better on the work at hand, achieve goals, and see obstacles as challenges, not threats. Those who are anxious, in contrast, readily become preoccupied with the specter of failure, fearing that doing poorly will mean they will be rejected or abandoned, in this context fired, and so they play it safe. People who feel that their boss provides a secure base, Kohlreiser finds, are more free to explore, be playful, take risks, innovate, and take on new challenges. Another business benefit: if leaders establish such trust and safety, then when they give tough feedback, the person receiving it not only stays more open, but sees benefit in getting even hard-to-take information. Like a parent, however, a leader should not protect employees from every tension or stress. Resilience grows from a modicum of discomfort generated by necessary pressures at work. But since too much stress overwhelms, an astute leader acts as a secure base by lessening overwhelming pressures if possible, or at least not making them worse. For instance, a mid-level executive tells me, "My boss is a superb buffer. Whatever financial performance pressures he gets from headquarters, and they are considerable, he does not pass them down to us. The head of a sister division in our corporation, though, does, subjecting all his employees to a personal profit and loss evaluation every quarter, even though the products they develop take 2 to 3 years to come to market." On the other hand, if members of a work team are resilient, highly motivated, and good at what they do, in other words, if they have high tipping points on the inverted U, a leader can be challenging and demanding and still get good results. Yet disaster can result when such a high-pressure leader shifts to a less gung-ho culture. An investment banker tells me of a hard-driving, bottom-line 24/7 leader who yelled when displeased. When he merged his company with another, the same style that worked for him before drove away all the managers in the acquired business, who saw him as intolerable. The company's stock price still had not risen 2 years after the merger. No child can avoid emotional pain while growing up, and likewise, emotional toxicity seems to be a normal byproduct of organizational life. People are fired, unfair policies come from headquarters, frustrated employees turn in anger on others. The causes are legion: abusive bosses or unpleasant coworkers, frustrating procedures, chaotic change. Reactions range from anguish and rage to lost confidence or hopelessness. Perhaps luckily, we do not have to depend only on the boss. Colleagues, a work team, friends at work, and even the organization itself can create the sense of having a secure base. Everyone in a given workplace contributes to the emotional stew, the sum total of the moods that emerge as they interact through the workday. No matter what our designated role may be, how we do our work, interact, and make each other feel adds to the overall emotional tone. Whether it's a supervisor or fellow worker who we can turn to when upset, their mere existence has a tonic benefit. For many working people, co-workers become something like a family, a group in which members feel a strong emotional attachment for one another. This makes them especially loyal to each other as a team. The stronger the emotional bonds among workers, the more motivated, productive, and satisfied with their work they are. Our sense of engagement and satisfaction at work results in large part from the hundreds and hundreds of daily interactions we have while there, whether with a supervisor, colleagues, or customers. The accumulation and frequency of positive versus negative moments largely determines our satisfaction and ability to perform. Small exchanges, a compliment on work well done, a word of support after a setback, add up to how we feel on the job. Even having just one person who can be counted on at work can make a telling difference on how we feel. In surveys of more than 5 million people working in close to 500 organizations, one of the best predictors of how happy someone felt on their job was agreement with the statement, "I have a best friend at work." The more such sources of emotional support we have in our work life, the better off we are. A cohesive group with a secure and security-promoting leader creates an emotional surround that can be so contagious that even people who tend to be highly anxious find themselves relaxing. As the head of a high-performing scientific team told me, "I never bring anyone into my lab without them working with us provisionally for a while. Then I ask the other people in the lab their opinions, and I defer to them. If the interpersonal chemistry is not good, I don't want to risk hiring someone, no matter how good they may be otherwise." The socially intelligent leader. The Human Resources Department of a large corporation arranged a day-long workshop by a famous expert in the company's area of specialty. A larger-than-expected crowd showed up, and at the last minute, the event was switched to a larger room, one that could hold everyone but was poorly equipped. As a result, the people in the back had trouble seeing or hearing the speaker. At the morning break, a woman sitting in the back marched up to the head of Human Resources, shaking with rage and complaining that she could neither glimpse the screen on which the speaker's image was being projected nor make out his words. I knew that all I could do was listen, empathize, acknowledge her problem, and tell her I'd do my best to fix things, the head of Human Resources told me. At the break, she saw me go to the audiovisual people and at least tried to get the screen higher. I couldn't do much at all about the bad acoustics. I saw that woman again at the end of the day. She told me she couldn't really hear or see all that much better, but now she was relaxed about it. She really appreciated my hearing her out and trying to help. When people in an organization feel angry and distressed, a leader, like that HR head, can at least listen with empathy, show concern, and make a goodwill effort to change things for the better. Whether or not that effort solves the problem, it does some good emotionally. By attending to someone's feelings, the leader helps metabolize them so the person can move on rather than continuing to seethe. The leader need not necessarily agree with the person's position or reaction, but simply acknowledging their point of view Then apologizing if necessary or otherwise seeking a remedy diffuses some of the toxicity, rendering destructive emotions less harmful. In a survey of employees at 700 companies, the majority said that a caring boss was more important to them than how much they earned. This finding has business implications beyond just making people feel good. The same survey found that employees' liking for their boss was a prime driver of both productivity and the length of time they stayed at the job. Given the choice, people don't want to work for a toxic boss at nearly any wage, except to get enough screw-you money to quit with security. Socially intelligent leadership starts with being fully present and getting in sync. Once a leader is engaged, then the full panoply of social intelligence can come into play, from sensing how people feel and why, to interacting smoothly enough to move people into a positive state. There is no magic recipe for what to do in every situation, no 5 steps to social intelligence at work. But whatever we do as we interact, the single measure of its success will be where in the inverted U each person ends up. Businesses are on the front lines of applying social intelligence. As people work longer and longer hours, businesses loom as their substitute family, village, and social network. Yet most of us can be tossed out at the will of management. That inherent ambivalence means that in more and more organizations, hope and fear run rampant. Excellence in people management cannot ignore these subterranean affective currents. They have real human consequences, and they matter for people's abilities to perform at their best. And because emotions are so contagious, every boss at every level needs to remember he or she can make matters either worse or better. A special connection. Maeva's school was in one of New York City's most impoverished neighborhoods. At 13, she was only in 6th grade, 2 years behind her peers. She'd been held back twice, and Maeva had a reputation as a troublemaker. Among the teachers at her middle school, she was notorious for storming out of class and refusing to return, instead spending most of the school day roaming the halls. Before Pamela, Maeva's new English teacher, first met her charge, she was warned that Maeva was certain to be a behavior problem. So, on the first day of class, after assigning her students to work on their own to pick out the main idea from a reading passage, Pamela went over to Maeva to help her out. After just a minute or two, Pamela realized what was bothering Maeva. Her reading level was that of a kindergartner. So often, behavior problems are because a student feels insecure about being unable to do the work, Pamela told me. Maeva couldn't even sound out words. I was shocked she had gotten to 6th grade without learning how to read. That day, Pamela helped Maeva do the worksheet by reading it to her. Later that day, Pamela sought out a special education teacher whose task included helping such students. The two teachers felt they had one last chance to keep Maeva from dropping out of school. The special ed teacher agreed to tutor Maeva daily in reading, starting from the very beginning level. Even so, Maeva still proved a problem, as her other teachers had warned. She'd talk throughout class, be rude and pushy with other kids, and pick fights, anything to avoid reading. And if that wasn't enough, she'd exclaim, "I don't want to do this," bolt out of class, and wander the school hallways. Despite the resistance, Pamela doggedly gave Maeva extra help with her work in class, and when Maeva would blow up at another student, Pamela would take her into the privacy of the hallway and think through with her a better way to resolve things. Mostly, Pamela showed Maeva that she cared about her. We'd joke around, spend extra time together. She'd come up to be with me in my classroom after she finished her lunch. I met with her mom. Her mother was as surprised as Pamela had been to realize that Maeva could not read, but her mother had 7 other children to handle. Maeva's problem had gone unnoticed amid the bustling crowd at home, just as it had gone uncorrected at school. Pamela got Maeva's mother to agree to help her daughter behave better and give her some extra attention and homework help at home. Maeva's first semester report card, when she had been with another English teacher, showed her failing most every class, as she had done for years. But after just 4 months with Pamela, there were marked changes for the better. By the end of the semester, she had stopped hiding her frustration by roaming the halls, now staying put in the classroom. Most important, her report card showed that Maeva had passed every class. Most just barely, but with a surprisingly high grade in math. She had mastered the first 2 years of reading in just a few months. Then came the moment in her reading circle when Maeva realized she was more adept than a few others, including one boy who had freshly arrived from West Africa, so she took it upon herself to help him unlock the secrets of reading. That special connection between Pamela and Maeva represents a powerful tool in helping children learn. Mounting research shows that students who feel connected to school, to teachers, to other students, to the school itself, do better academically. They also fare better in resisting the perils of modern adolescence. Emotionally connected students have lower rates of violence, bullying, and vandalism, anxiety and depression, drug use and suicide, truancy and dropping out. Feeling connected here refers not to some vague niceness, but to concrete emotional links between students and the people in their schools, other kids, teachers, staff. One powerful method to foster such links is to build just the sort of attuned relationship between student and adult that Pamela offered Maeva. Pamela became Maeva's secure base. Consider what this could mean for the bottom 10% of students, those like Maeva most at risk for failure. In a study of 910 first graders from a national sample representative of the entire United States, trained observers evaluated their teachers and assessed the effect of teaching style on how well the at-risk children learned. The best results were found when teachers tuned into the child and responded to his needs, moods, interests, and capabilities, letting them guide their interactions. Created an upbeat classroom climate with pleasant conversations, lots of laughter and excitement. Showed warmth and positive regard toward students. Had good classroom management, with clear but flexible expectations and routines so that students followed rules largely on their own. The worst outcomes resulted when teachers took an I-it stance and imposed their own agenda on students without tuning in, or were emotionally distant and uninvolved. Such teachers were angry at students more often and had to resort to punitive methods of restoring order. Students who were already doing well continued to do so regardless of the setting, but at-risk students who had cold or controlling teachers floundered academically, even when their teachers followed pedagogic guidelines for good instruction. Yet the study found a stunning difference among the at-risk students. If they had a warm, responsive teacher, they flourished, learning as well as the other kids. The power of an emotionally connected teacher does not end in first grade. Sixth graders who had such a teacher earned better grades not only that year, but the next as well. Good teachers are like good parents. By offering a secure base, a teacher creates an environment that lets students' brains function at their best. That base becomes a safe haven, a zone of strength from which they can venture forth to explore, to master something new, to achieve. That secure base can become internalized when students are taught to better manage their anxiety and so more keenly focus their attention. This enhances their ability to reach that optimal zone for learning. There are already dozens of programs in social-emotional learning that do just this. The best designed to fit seamlessly into the standard school curriculum for children at every age, inculcating skills like self-awareness and managing distressing emotions, empathy, and navigating relationships smoothly. A definitive meta-analysis of more than 100 of these programs showed that students not only mastered abilities like calming down and getting along better, but, more to the point here, learned more effectively. Their grades improved, and their scores on academic achievement tests were a hefty 12% higher than similar students who did not have the programs. Those programs work best if students feel teachers really care about them. But whether or not a school has such an offering, whenever teachers create an empathic and responsive environment, students not only improve in their grades and test scores, they become eager learners. Even one supportive adult at school can make a difference to a student. Every Maeva needs a Pamela. Chapter 20. The Connectedness Corrective. Here's the list of life scars that Martin, just 15, enumerated on a line drawing of his own body, starting from the bottom up. His feet had been broken at ages 11 and 12. Both hands were scarred from fighting and stained through their contact with drugs, stolen property, and negative sexual relations. One arm had burns suffered while smoking marijuana. The other bore a knife wound. Around Martin's head swarmed the sleeplessness he'd had since he was 11, the emotional trauma he'd experienced since age 2 from ongoing physical abuse and sexual assaults, including from his own father at age 7, and brain injuries from a suicide attempt at 11. And from age 8, he noted, his brain had been fried from abusing pills, weed, meth, alcohol, shrooms, and opium. Martin's appalling litany of wounds is typical of all too many teenagers currently serving sentences in juvenile jails. Youth prisons have become a seemingly inevitable stop for troubled lives, those for whom childhood abuse merges seamlessly with substance abuse and social predation. While in many countries more humane social systems lead such teenagers to treatment instead of punishment, in the United States they too often get care in prison, exactly the wrong setting for healing. Most prisons for youth are a prescription for a life of crime, not a ticket out. But Martin is one of the lucky ones. He lives in Missouri, a state that has led the way in treating young offenders rather than just punishing them. Missouri has come a long way. Its main youth correctional facility was once described by a federal court as having a quasi-penal military atmosphere, and it was condemned for frequently banishing unruly inmates to a dark, solitary confinement cell known as the Hole. A former superintendent of that facility confessed, "I saw black eyes, battered faces, and broken noses among the boys. The usual corrective procedure among the guards was to knock a boy down with their fists, then kick him in the groin. Many of the men were sadists." That description from decades ago may still hold true in many prisons. But now that Missouri has chosen to treat youthful offenders, Martin's facility offers a hopeful alternative. He lives in one of a network of small homes for troubled, law-breaking adolescents like himself, established in 1983. Some of the homes are in old-school buildings or large houses. One is in an abandoned convent. Each of them is home to no more than 36 teens and a small staff of adults. These teens are not faceless cogs in some vast institution. Everyone in each home knows the names of all the residents. They live as a family, offering the teens continuing one-on-one relationships with caring adults. There are no iron bars, no cells, few locked doors, and little security equipment of any kind, though video monitors keep track of what's going on. The atmosphere is more like that of a home than a jail. The teens are grouped into teams of 10 or so, and members are responsible for seeing that they all follow the rules. The teams eat, sleep, study, and shower together, always with the supervision of 2 youth specialists. If a resident does act up, there are no isolation cells, restraints, or handcuffs, the toolkit typical of most juvenile corrections facilities. Instead, the teams are taught how to safely restrain any member who threatens someone else's safety. They grab his arms and legs and wrestle their teammate to the ground. Then they simply hold him there until he calms down and regains composure. The program director reports there has never been a serious injury from such team restraint, and fights are nearly non-existent. Half a dozen times a day, the members form into a circle to check in with each other to say how they feel. A team member may call for an extra circle to raise concerns or talk over a complaint, most often about issues of safety, courtesy, and respect. That way, the focus can shift from a class, exercise, or cleanup to the compelling emotional undercurrents that, if ignored, can build into a blow-up. Each afternoon, they meet for activities that are designed to enhance camaraderie and cooperation, to foster empathy and accurate perceptions of each other, and to build communication skills and trust. All of that constructs a secure base and provides them with the social abilities they so desperately need. That aura of safety is crucial, particularly in getting the teens to open up about their troubled past. Trust is key. One by one, they tell their life stories to the rest of their team, tales of domestic violence and sexual victimization, abuse and neglect. And they open up about their own wrongdoings and the crimes that sent them to the facility. Treatment does not end the day the teens leave. Instead of simply being assigned to an overburdened parole officer, standard practice in most places, Missouri youngsters meet their post-release coordinator when they arrive in the facility. By the time they're discharged, they have a long-standing relationship with the person who will guide them back into community life. Aftercare is a core part of the Missouri formula. Each teen meets frequently with his coordinator and even more often with a tracker, typically someone from his hometown or a local college student, who monitors his day-to-day progress and helps him find a job. Does all this elaborate treatment make much difference? Follow-up studies of teens who have been released from correctional facilities are rare, but a 1999 study found that the recidivism rate for the Missouri program was just about 8% over the 3 years following a teenager's release, while in Maryland, 30% of those released from juvenile correctional facilities were back in jail within 3 years. Another comparison looked at the rates at which released teens were returned to juvenile custody or adult prison, or got probation during the first year after release. The rate in Missouri was just 9%, compared to 29% in Florida. And then there's the human cost of imprisoning youngsters in horrific jails. Over 4 recent years, 110 teenagers committed suicide in juvenile facilities nationwide. In the 20 years of the Missouri program, there have been no suicides. The Kalamazoo Model. The small city of Kalamazoo, Michigan, was in turmoil. Voters were riled up about a referendum to raise $140 million for a new youth prison. Everyone agreed that the old one was overcrowded and inhumane. That was no issue. The fight was over what should replace the antiquated building. Some argued fiercely for just upgrading the building, using better barbed wire, cells, locks, and adding a bit more room. But their opponents rejoined that the community needed to find better ways to keep young people from committing crimes in the first place, and from repeating if they did. One of the local judges suggested that both sides talk things over at a one-day retreat at the nearby Fetzer Institute. Everyone involved in the debate came: church leaders, prisoner advocacy groups, the sheriff, judges, the superintendent of schools, mental health workers, and some of the most liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans. That meeting in Kalamazoo is emblematic of a movement sweeping the country, as concerned citizens confront the failure of the prison system to protect them from criminals who simply repeat what they know best: crime. Groups everywhere are rethinking the very meaning of corrections. To be sure, distinctions are made within the spectrum of crimes, and prisoners are sorted accordingly into the levels of human ugliness they will endure day to day. For many, prison is a hellish realm, where convicts struggle in a tooth-and-nail battle. Everyone fights to get respect, and toughness wins prestige. The prison yard becomes a jungle where the powerful prevail and fear rules. It's a psychopath's paradise where cool-headed cruelty wins the day. But the neural lessons learned from being trapped in an I-it universe are surely the worst. Survival there demands an amygdala that is set for paranoid hypervigilance, plus a protective emotional distance or outright distrust, and a readiness to fight. We could not design a better environment for fostering criminal instincts. Are these the best schools for a society to be sending people to? Most particularly those still in their teens and 20s who have a full life ahead of them? If they live in such settings for months or years, small wonder so many go back to crime on their release and end up right back in those festering holes. Instead of relying on approaches that simply breed more criminality, we could take advantage of what correction means from the viewpoint of social neuroplasticity, the shaping of brain circuitry through beneficial interactions. A great many of the people in prison are arguably there because of neural deficits in the social brain, like impaired empathy and impulse control. One neural key to self-control is the array of neurons in the orbital frontal cortex that can inhibit angry impulses from the amygdala. People with a deficit in the OFC are prone to brutality in moments when their violent urges swamp its ability to inhibit them. Our prisons are home to many such criminals. One neural pattern underlying this out-of-control violence appears to be an underactivation in the frontal lobes, often due to violent injuries in childhood. This deficit centers on the circuitry running from the OFC to the amygdala, the neural link that forms the brain's brake on destructive urges. People with frontal lobe damage are poor at what psychologists call cognitive control. They cannot voluntarily direct their thoughts, especially when swamped with powerful negative feelings. This inability renders them helpless to resist the rush of destructive feelings. Since their neural brakes are broken, their cruel impulses go unrestrained. This crucial brain circuit continues to grow and be shaped into a person's mid-20s. From the neural perspective, during imprisonment, society has a choice between strengthening the prisoner's circuitry for hostility, impulsivity, and violence, or strengthening their circuitry for self-control, thinking before acting, and the very ability to obey the law. Perhaps the greatest missed opportunity in the penal system has been the failure to treat younger prisoners who are still within the window where the social brain remains most plastic. The lessons they learn from day to day in the prison yard leave a profound and lasting imprint on their neural destiny, for better or worse. At present, it is for the worst. The tragedy is double. Not only do we waste that opportunity to help reshape the neural circuitry that can help these young lives get back on track, but we plunge them into a school for criminality. Nationwide, the cumulative lifetime recidivism for prisoners aged 25 and under, those newest to a criminal career, inevitably runs the highest of any age group. On any given day, the United States has more than 2 million people in prison, or 482 inmates per 100,000 residents, one of the highest rates of incarceration in the world, followed by Britain, China, France, and Japan. The prison population today is 7 times larger than it was 3 decades ago. The costs have risen even more, from around $9 billion in the 1980s to more than $60 billion by 2005. Prison costs are the fastest growing expenses for states, behind health care. The relentless increase in the number of inmates in American prisons has created a population explosion that has jails dangerously overcrowded and states and counties like Kalamazoo scrambling to find ways to pay for them. More compelling than the economic costs are the human ones. Once a person is caught up in the prison system, the odds that he will escape its gravitational pull are abysmally low. 2/3 of those released from American prisons are arrested again within 3 years. Such were the raw realities contemplated by those concerned citizens of Kalamazoo. By end of their day of retreat, they had found common cause to make Kalamazoo the safest, most just community in the United States. Toward that end, they scoured the country to find out what works, approaches that actually lowered the rate of return to prison, or had other concrete benefits, and the hard data to show it. The result is a rarity, an evidence-based plan for turning lives around, in large part by restoring the connective tissue that links people in trouble to those who care what happens to them. The Kalamazoo Group's proposal spans efforts to prevent crimes in the first place, use prison time fruitfully, and reintegrate those released into a web of relationships that will help them stay out of jail. The first guiding principle is that supportive connections prevent crime, and those connections must start in the neighborhoods where young people most at risk for crime live.